The wind howled a primeval symphony through the ancient firs, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something indefinably wild. It was a sound John knew intimately, having spent most of his adult life immersed in the raw, untamed heart of the Pacific Northwest. But tonight, the familiar chorus of nature felt charged with an unsettling undercurrent. A branch, impossibly thick, snapped with the force of a cannon shot somewhere deep within the impenetrable maze of trees, followed by a resonant thud that vibrated through the very ground beneath his remote cabin. It wasn't a deer, not a bear, and certainly not the usual symphony of nocturnal woodland creatures. This was something heavier, something with an impact that made the very air feel dense with unspoken possibility. He'd lived in this secluded valley for years, a self-imposed exile from a world that had, quite frankly, broken him. John, once a celebrated wildlife biologist, now merely a disillusioned forest ranger, had traded lab coats and academic accolades for the solitude of towering timber and whispering streams. The wild was his sanctuary, his confessional, the only place where the ghosts of his past felt a little less potent. A personal tragedy, a wound too deep to ever truly heal, had driven him here, to the edge of civilization, where the wilderness offered a brutal honesty he couldn't find among people. His cabin, a rustic testament to self-sufficiency, stood as a sentinel against the encroaching silence, his deep knowledge of the forest its only true defender. Every rustle, every snap, every distant cry of a predator was a familiar page in a book he'd memorized chapter and verse. But tonight, the narrative had shifted. The forest felt wrong. A low, guttural moan, a sound of profound distress tore through the darkness, cutting through the drumming rain like a shard of ice. It was a sound that resonated not just in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones, a primal cry of pain and fear that spoke of suffering on a scale he'd never encountered in all his years among wild animals. He pulled on his rain-slicked gear, grabbing a powerful flashlight and his worn but reliable hunting rifle. Not that he expected to use it for anything other than a deterrent. His instinct was always to observe, to understand, to help if he could. But the sheer scale of the sound, the undeniable power behind that pained cry, suggested something far beyond his usual purview. The storm had been ferocious, a relentless barrage of wind and rain that had stripped branches from trees and churned the normally placid river into a raging torrent. It was the kind of storm that reshaped landscapes, a true force of nature, and it seemed had left something else in its wake. Following the faint, sporadic sounds of movement and distress, John pushed deeper into the saturated woods, his beam cutting through the inky blackness like a fragile lifeline. He navigated fallen trees and treacherous mud with the practiced ease of someone who belonged to this land, his senses heightened, his heart thrumming with a mixture of apprehension and an undeniable surge of the old biologist's curiosity. Then he saw it. Lying partially obscured beneath a massive uprooted cedar, its massive form barely discernible in the flickering light, was a creature unlike anything he had ever witnessed. It was colossal, easily twice the size of a grown man, cloaked in thick, dark fur matted with rain and blood. Its posture was awkwardly contorted, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash marred its side, weeping darkly into the sodden earth. But it wasn't just its size or its injuries that froze John in place. It was the face. Underneath the heavy brow and broad, powerful jaw, there were eyes. Eyes that held a depth of intelligence and pain that was profoundly, unequivocally human-like. Not the vacant stare of an injured deer, nor the cunning glint of a wounded wolf. These were sentient eyes, pools of suffering that locked onto his, with an intensity that stole his breath. It was clearly non-human, an animal in its raw power and sheer scale. Yet its features, its gaze, spoke of a consciousness that defied every zoological classification he knew. It was too intelligent to be merely beast, too wild to be man. A low moan, soft this time, escaped its lips, a sound that pulled at something deep within John, a forgotten chord of empathy. This creature, whatever it was gravely injured, vulnerable, and clearly in immense pain. His scientific mind, dormant for so long, screamed for analysis, for classification, for answers. But his human heart, still capable of feeling despite its scars, cried out for compassion. This wasn't some mythical beast to be hunted or studied from afar. This was a living, breathing being, hurt and alone. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this discovery changed everything. His solitary life, his quiet retreat, his carefully constructed walls against the world, they all threatened to crumble around him. For in the eyes of this magnificent, suffering creature, John saw not just an enigma, but a responsibility. Before you find out what John does next, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories of the unexplained, the unbelievable, and the utterly captivating. Your support helps us bring these journeys to life. John stared, unblinking, at the fallen creature. The moonlight, now filtering through the parting clouds, cast long, eerie shadows across its massive hirsute form. This was no bear, no elk, no animal he had ever encountered in decades spent navigating these ancient woods. Its proportions were undeniably humanoid, yet exaggerated, ancient, primal. A sickening realization began to unfurl within him, chilling him far more profoundly than the damp, cold mountain air. Bigfoot. The whispered legend, the campfire tale, the academic taboo, lay wounded and vulnerable at his feet. A juvenile, judging by its slightly less imposing stature compared to the full-grown specimens described in folklore, but still easily twice his weight. His mind reeled, a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. His scientific training, once a source of comfort and certainty, now buckled under the weight of this impossible reality. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to document, to report, to shatter the scientific paradigm. Yet another, more primal instinct, one honed by years of solitary communion with the wilderness, urged restraint, protection. To reveal this creature, especially in its current state, would be to condemn it. He knew the world, the insatiable hunger of men for sensation, for exploitation, for dissection. This wasn't just an animal. It possessed an intelligence in its still, almost thoughtful gaze that transcended mere instinct. It held a flicker of something deeply familiar, something that resonated with his own solitude and pain. The dilemma was stark, brutal, and immediate. Hiding it meant risking everything. His career, already a shadow of its former self, his freedom, perhaps even his life. The creature's injuries were severe, a deep gash across its flank, likely from a falling tree branch during the storm, and a possibly fractured limb. It had lost a significant amount of blood, staining the earth black. There was no vet within 100 miles capable of handling something like this, even if he dared to summon one. His faded medical knowledge, a forgotten relic from his pre-ranger days when he'd flirted with veterinary school, would have to suffice. This creature needed help. His help. And in that moment, the choice was made. The allure of scientific glory paled before the silent plea in its eyes. He began, cautiously, speaking in low, soothing tones, words he wouldn't have believed he'd ever utter to a cryptid. "All right, big fella," he murmured, kneeling slowly, assessing the damage. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He retrieved his emergency first aid kit, usually reserved for his own minor mishaps, or an injured deer he might stumble upon. The antiseptic spray felt ridiculously inadequate against such a massive wound, but it was a start. He cleaned it as best he could, the creature flinching but remarkably still. He worked with a strange mix of fear and an almost paternal tenderness. Its fur, thick and matted with blood and forest debris, felt surprisingly soft beneath his touch. He noted its rapid, shallow breathing, a sign of shock and pain. For the next few days, John's cabin became an impromptu, clandestine infirmary. He used his knowledge of forest remedies, supplemented by the limited supplies he had, to tend to the creature. He concocted poultices from willow bark for pain relief and infused teas for its blood loss. He learned quickly of its preference for wild berries and fish, which he painstakingly gathered from the nearby stream under the cloak of night. He started calling it Willow, partly because of the soothing bark he used, and partly because of the creature's surprisingly gentle demeanor, despite its immense size and power. Willow, though initially distant and wary, began to exhibit small, subtle signs of trust. It would watch him with an intense, intelligent gaze as he changed its makeshift bandages, its large, dark eyes conveying a depth of emotion that startled him. He observed its interactions with the cabin's few resident squirrels and birds, noting a remarkable gentleness, almost a curiosity, rather than predatory aggression. Willow would occasionally emit low, rumbling sounds, some of which John began to interpret as expressions of discomfort, others as contentment. There was a moment, late one evening, when John was meticulously cleaning the wound, and Willow, in a gesture so utterly human-like it stole his breath, gently nudged his hand with its large, calloused one, a silent acknowledgement of the pain he was alleviating. It was a connection born of shared vulnerability, an unlikely bridge between species. But this fragile peace was not destined to last. One morning, as John ventured out to check his trap lines and forage, he saw it. A glint of metallic paint, half hidden by dense foliage on the old logging road, far too deep into the wilderness for any casual tourist. Then, a few days later, he spotted unfamiliar tire tracks, much larger and more aggressive than those of typical Forest Service vehicles, near the perimeter of his property. He dismissed them initially as an aberration, perhaps a rogue hunter or prospector. But then came the distant, rhythmic thud of a helicopter. Not the familiar choppers of the local lumber company, but something heavier, more military grade, circling a geographical area unsettlingly close to his cabin. He recognized the pattern, the methodical grid search being employed. A cold dread seeped into his bones. His remote sanctuary, his carefully constructed isolation, was no longer secret. Someone was looking for something, and a terrifying instinct told him that something might just be his unique, colossal patient, Willow. The outside world, with its relentless curiosity and its crushing authority, was encroaching, threatening to shatter the delicate bond he had forged and expose Willow to a fate John knew he must prevent at all costs. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. As weeks bled into months, an unlikely rhythm settled into John's isolated life, dictated by Willow's slow, arduous recovery. The initial fear that had gripped him began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of responsibility, and surprisingly, a burgeoning affection. Willow, no longer a thrashing, injured enigma, transformed into a gentle giant under John's ceaseless care. Its fever broke. The deep gashes on its flank began to knit together, and the unnatural stillness in its eyes gave way to a flicker of curiosity and, eventually, a trust that astounded John. He found himself spending hours just observing Willow, marveling at the intricate patterns of its fur, the quiet intelligence in its deep-set eyes, and the surprisingly delicate way it would accept food from his outstretched hand. John, an ex-biologist, had always understood animal behavior, but Willow transcended anything he had ever encountered. This wasn't merely an animal. It was a sentient being, operating on a level he couldn't quite grasp, yet one that communicated its needs and even its gratitude with remarkable clarity. He began to teach Willow basic communication through gestures, a pat on the chest for here, a sweep of the hand towards the forest for outside, a simple nod for yes, a shake for no. Willow, to his astonishment, not only understood but reciprocated, developing its own series of grunts, soft chirps, and nuanced body language that John slowly learned to interpret. A low rumble in its chest meant contentment, a soft, almost imperceptible whine signaled discomfort, and a slow blink of its enormous eyes conveyed a deep sense of calm. What truly solidified their bond was Willow's protective instincts. As Willow regained strength, a subtle shift occurred. It was no longer just John caring for Willow. Willow was beginning to care for John. If John stumbled while carrying water, Willow would emit a soft, chiding growl. When John was out gathering firewood, Willow would often sit near the cabin entrance, its gaze sweeping the tree line, an unspoken sentinel. One evening, a cougar, emboldened by hunger, ventured too close to the cabin. Before John could even react, Willow, still recovering but agile enough, let out a terrifying roar that sent the predator scrambling back into the shadows, disappearing instantly. In that moment, John knew Willow wasn't just a patient. It was a companion, a guardian, and a friend. The idyllic, if precarious peace was shattered one crisp morning when John's antiquated but highly modified shortwave radio crackled to life with encrypted chatter. Static-laced voices, terse and professional, discussed grid coordinates that were unsettlingly close to his location. John, with his years as a ranger, had a knack for deciphering codes and sifting through radio noise. He recognized the disciplined cadence, the precise jargon. This wasn't local law enforcement or park service. This sounded like a military operation, but not quite. The keywords that sliced through the encryption sent a chill down his spine. Anomalous biological entities, unconfirmed sightings, containment protocols, and District 4 Gamma, his district. His blood ran cold. They were looking for Willow. The clinical detachment in their voices, the explicit mention of containment, painted a chilling picture of their intentions. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that their methods would be anything but gentle. The search intensified rapidly. John, now hypervigilant, began hearing distant helicopter patrols, their throbbing blades a constant low thrum against the forest's natural symphony. He saw unfamiliar vehicles, dark and nondescript, on the rarely used logging roads miles from his cabin. One afternoon, while checking his remote traps, he stumbled upon a temporary campsite, recently abandoned, but still bearing the marks of a professional military or paramilitary unit. Cans of specialized rations, a discarded cigarette butt of a brand he didn't recognize, and disturbingly, a spent tranquilizer dart cartridge designed for large game. The dart was ominously large. Narrow escapes became a regular, heart-pounding ordeal. John's intimate knowledge of the forest, honed over decades, became their greatest asset. On several occasions, he and Willow had to retreat into hidden crevices and dense thickets, holding their breath as search parties, their voices echoing through the trees, passed within mere yards. Once, a particularly persistent patrol came so close to the cabin that John could hear their boots crunching on the gravel path. Willow, sensing the danger, had instinctively pressed itself against the back wall of the cabin, its massive body surprisingly still, its breathing shallow, mimicking a fallen log. John, concealed under a pile of tarps, watched through a narrow crack as the men shone powerful flashlights into every corner, their movements systematic and chillingly thorough. The pressure mounted, a suffocating weight on John's shoulders. He knew he couldn't maintain this charade indefinitely. The forest, vast as it was slowly shrinking under the relentless scrutiny. Every passing day, the net tightened, and the stakes grew higher. He wasn't just hiding an animal anymore. He was hiding a miracle, a being whose very existence would shatter humanity's understanding of the natural world, a being for whom discovery by these entities would undoubtedly mean a tragic end. John knew he had to do more than just hide. He needed a plan, a way to keep Willow safe, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had left. The thought of losing Willow, of failing this gentle giant who had come to trust him, was unbearable. He looked at Willow's calm, reassuring gaze, and a fierce resolve hardened in his eyes. There was no turning back. John watched Willow carefully, observing the creature with a mixture of wonder and scientific curiosity. The days they spent together, often in silent companionship, allowed him to learn an astonishing amount about its unique physiology and surprisingly gentle nature. Willow possessed an innate grace despite its colossal size, moving through the undergrowth with a quiet fluidity that belied its bulk. Its fur, a rich tapestry of deep browns and subtle grays, was not merely coarse hair, but seemed to adapt to its surroundings, almost camouflaging it, even in sparse foliage. John noticed the subtle shifts in its facial expressions, the way its large, intelligent eyes conveyed thought and emotion far beyond that of any animal he had ever encountered. There was a quiet wisdom in its gaze, an ancient understanding of the forest that transcended human comprehension. He discovered Willow's extraordinary connection to the natural world. It wasn't just an inhabitant of the forest. It was an integral part of its delicate ecosystem. John observed Willow meticulously caring for other creatures, its massive hands surprisingly dexterous, as it would gently relocate fallen bird nests, or even offer a piece of wild fruit to a small, shivering deer fawn it encountered. He watched, captivated, as Willow seemed to communicate with the environment itself. One afternoon, a small, injured badger stumbled near their hidden resting place. Its leg was clearly broken, and it whimpered in pain. John, ever the biologist, approached cautiously, but before he could act, Willow had already moved. It carefully cradled the badger, its large fingers surprisingly delicate, and then, to John's utter astonishment, a soft, ethereal glow emanated from Willow's palms as it pressed them gently against the badger's wound. Within moments, the badger stopped whimpering, and with a final, almost imperceptible pulse of light, it scurried off, its gait no longer favoring the injured limb. Willow possessed extraordinary healing abilities, a phenomenon that defied all scientific understanding. John witnessed several such instances, small miracles, that solidified his conviction that Willow was not just a rare primate, but a being of profound, almost mystical significance. Its touch could soothe, mend, and even invigorate. This deepening connection with Willow intensified John's moral dilemma. He, a man of science, was grappling with a secret that could rewrite biology, anthropology, and perhaps even human history itself. The ethical implications of hiding a creature of such groundbreaking importance weighed heavily on his conscience. He understood the scientific community's hunger for discovery, the insatiable need to categorize and study. Yet, he also foresaw the inevitable exploitation, the relentless pursuit that would strip Willow of its dignity, its freedom, and ultimately, its life. He pictured Willow confined in a laboratory, its unique abilities analyzed to death, its gentle spirit broken by invasive procedures. He envisioned it gawked at in a zoo, a spectacle rather than a living being. The thought was unbearable. The FBI's aggressive tactics, their cold clinical language of containment and eradication, only reinforced his fears. He knew, with absolute certainty, that if they found Willow, it would not be to understand it, but to control it, or worse, to erase it from existence. The weight of this responsibility fueled a new, desperate urgency within him. He started making preparations, his old ranger skills resurfacing with a renewed purpose. His cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, too exposed, too vulnerable. They needed to disappear, to melt into the vast, untamed wilderness that Willow knew so intimately. John began stockpiling essential supplies, high-calorie, non-perishable foods, water purification tablets, medical kits, and robust wilderness gear. He meticulously organized everything, ensuring it was lightweight and easily transportable. He also started setting up a network of hidden caches deep within the forest, selecting locations known only to him, camouflaged with practiced precision. These caches contained emergency rations, extra blankets, and even spare tools, strategically placed along multiple potential escape routes. He revisited ancient, forgotten trails, overgrown and nearly invisible to anyone but a seasoned woodsman, clearing just enough of the underbrush to make them passable for two. John spent hours poring over his old topographical maps, tracing potential paths deeper into the untouched heart of the wilderness. Areas so remote that even the most determined search parties would struggle to penetrate. He identified natural shelters, caves, and rock overhangs that could provide refuge. He studied the migration patterns of animals, the seasonal availability of wild foods, and the locations of pristine water sources. Every detail was considered, every contingency planned for. He knew this wasn't just an escape. It was a commitment to a new way of life, a life lived on the run, constantly vigilant. He observed Willow, who seemed to understand the shift in John's demeanor, the quiet intensity that now permeated his every action. Willow would often watch him prepare, its large head cocked in a gesture of understanding, sometimes offering a low, resonant rumble that John interpreted as reassurance or perhaps even an offer of help. The bond between them had deepened into an unspoken pact, a shared determination to face whatever lay ahead. John knew that his life, as he had known it, was over. But looking at Willow, at the profound wisdom in its eyes and the gentle power in its presence, he realized that what he was gaining was far more precious than anything he was leaving behind. He was protecting not just a creature, but a secret that held the potential for a new understanding of the world, a secret that deserved to remain free. The preparations were almost complete. The direct confrontation he anticipated felt imminent, a storm gathering on the horizon. He was ready for it. The tightening noose around John's remote haven felt palpable, a suffocating pressure that signaled a new, more formidable adversary was now orchestrating the hunt. His suspicions were confirmed when Agent Thorne arrived, an ice-cold efficiency radiating from his every move. Thorne wasn't just another operative. He was a legend within the clandestine corridors of federal agencies, a man known for his unwavering resolve and an almost superhuman ability to achieve his objectives, regardless of the ethical cost. John heard the whispers from his old contacts, Vague, fear-laced rumors about Thorne's methods, his belief that any perceived threat to national security, no matter how unconventional, warranted immediate and decisive elimination. For Thorne, Bigfoot wasn't a biological marvel to be studied with awe. It was an anomalous variable, an unpredictable element that, left unchecked, could destabilize societal order. Its neutralization wasn't just an order, it was a crusade. Thorne's arrival marked an immediate shift in tactics. The sporadic, somewhat aimless searches gave way to a chillingly precise operation. Drones with thermal imaging capabilities began sweeping the forest canopy in systematic grids, their low hum a constant buzz in the crisp mountain air. Ground teams, now larger and better equipped, moved with a newfound purpose, their communication crisp, their movements coordinated. John watched from the cover of ancient pines as Thorne, a lean figure in tactical gear, barked orders into a comms unit, his gaze sweeping the terrain with an almost predatory intensity. He seemed to possess an innate understanding of the wilderness, not from love, but from a strategic perspective. Every ridge, every ravine, a potential hiding spot or an ambush point. The next few days were a harrowing dance of evasion. Thorne's unit began to close in on John's property with an undeniable certainty. John knew this wasn't mere chance. Thorne had likely triangulated their location through cell tower pings, supply runs, or perhaps even an old forgotten sensor left behind from his ranger days. There was no more time for subtlety. John initiated his contingency plan, a series of diversions designed to buy time. He set up false campfires miles from his cabin, scattering traces of human activity. An old shirt, a half-eaten can of beans, hoping to draw the search parties away. He rerouted small streams, creating new, muddy trails leading in directions opposite to Willow's true hiding spots. Using his years of experience, he even fashioned crude, non-lethal traps, tripwires that triggered loud bells, or released a cascade of small, harmless rocks, hoping to deter pursuers, or at least announce their presence. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of deep purple and orange, a team of Thorne's agents was on John's property, their flashlights cutting through the deepening gloom. John, hidden with Willow in a dense thicket overlooking the cabin, watched as they meticulously searched every nook and cranny. Thorne himself was there, his voice a low, gravelly command. "He's here," Thorne stated with an unnerving conviction. "And so is our target." John's heart pounded against his ribs. He had to act. With Willow's help, he triggered a diversion. A long, thin wire stretched taut across a deer trail, connected to a pile of strategically balanced logs. The crash echoed through the forest, drawing the agents' immediate attention. They moved quickly, their weapons raised, towards the sound, giving John and Willow a precious few minutes to slip away deeper into the forest. As they navigated the perilous terrain, John stumbled upon something that ignited a flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Tucked away in a seldom visited grotto, a cluster of ancient trees formed a natural sanctuary. There, he found not only clear signs of Willow's kind, deeply etched claw marks on tree trunks, too high for any bear, and a distinct, musky scent that was unmistakably Bigfoot, but also fresh tracks, larger than Willow's, leading away from the grotto. This wasn't just a lone, wounded juvenile. There were others. Willow wasn't alone. The realization sent a wave of exultation through John. For weeks, he had carried the crushing burden of Willow's survival solely on his shoulders, burdened by the belief that this creature was a solitary anomaly, hunted to the brink of extinction. But these tracks, this evidence, painted a different picture. Willow had a family, a community. The possibility of reuniting Willow with its own kind, of ensuring its long-term safety, provided a renewed surge of determination. It wasn't just about protecting a single individual anymore. It was about safeguarding an entire hidden species. The stakes had been impossibly high before, but now they felt even weightier, infused with a purpose far grander than mere survival. This glimmer of hope, however, was quickly overshadowed by the intensifying pursuit. Thorne was relentless, his tactics precise and methodical. He anticipated John's moves, sometimes almost as if he could read his mind. The aerial surveillance became more sophisticated, the ground teams more numerous and aggressive. John found himself constantly pushing the limits of his endurance, and Willow, despite its still recovering state, displayed an uncanny ability to sense danger, nudging John towards hidden paths, or freezing him in place just moments before a searchlight swept over their position. One morning, John woke to the chilling sound of a high-pitched whirring directly overhead. A large drone, far more advanced than anything he'd seen before, hovered silently just above the tree line. It was equipped with multiple sensors, its camera undoubtedly capturing every detail. Thorne was throwing everything he had at them. John knew their time in this section of the forest was rapidly drawing to a close. The hope he had found regarding other Bigfoots propelled him forward, but it also added a layer of urgency. He needed to lead Willow to safety, and he needed to do it quickly, before Thorne's iron-fisted resolve completely eradicated any chance of reunion. The fight wasn't just for Willow's life anymore. It was for its future, for its connection to a world John now knew existed, hidden just beyond the veil of human perception. The inevitable finally arrived with the brutal efficiency of a well-oiled machine. One frigid dawn, the quiet of the forest was shattered, not by the familiar chirping of birds, but by the distant thrumming that grew steadily louder, morphing into the deafening roar of multiple helicopters. Before John could even process the full implication, the forest around his cabin erupted with activity. Figures in dark, tactical gear swarmed through the trees, their movements swift and coordinated. He glimpsed the glint of rifles, the cold gleam of night vision goggles, even in the fading darkness. This wasn't a search party. It was a full-scale assault. He had expected this, prepared for it, yet the sheer force of it still struck him with a sickening blow. "Willow! Now!" he urged. His voice a strained whisper as he grabbed the small, pre-packed bag. Willow, sensing the immediate, overwhelming danger, moved with surprising speed for its size, its large frame disappearing as it ducked into the hidden entrance of the escape tunnel John had meticulously excavated beneath the cabin floor. John followed, pushing aside the cleverly disguised trapdoor, just as the first agent smashed through his front door with a resounding crash. The stale earth smell of the tunnel enveloped him, a stark contrast to the fresh pine scent of his now violated home. From within the darkness, he could hear the methodical destruction above. Glass shattering, furniture splintering, the heavy thud of boots on floorboards. They weren't just searching, they were tearing his life apart, piece by piece. The cabin, his sanctuary, his last tangible link to a past he cherished, was being systematically dismantled. A final, guttural roar of flames erupted, its heat palpable even through the thick earth above. He knew then his home was gone, reduced to ash and memories. There was no going back, no refuge to return to. All that remained was the forward path, deeper into the relentless wilderness. The tunnel was long, winding through the roots of ancient trees, before opening into a dense thicket miles away. They emerged into the pre-dawn gloom, the smoke from his burning cabin painting a grim silhouette against the horizon. The cold bit at him, but adrenaline coursed through his veins, sharpening his senses. The pursuit began almost immediately. He heard the distant bang of K9 units, the crackle of radio static growing closer, the relentless rhythmic beat of helicopter blades slicing through the air like an omnipresent predator. John led Willow through terrain only he knew, through forgotten game trails and treacherous ravines, using every trick he had learned in his decades as a ranger. He moved like a ghost, his steps light, his eyes scanning for any sign of their pursuers. Willow, despite its size, moved with an astonishing agility, its massive feet finding purchase on slippery rocks and steep slopes where John struggled. Its intuitive knowledge of the forest was breathtaking. It would occasionally nudge him, diverting him from a barely perceptible tripwire or signaling a hidden patrol. Days bled into nights, a blur of constant motion and desperate evasion. They foraged for berries, roots, and small game John could catch. They slept in makeshift shelters of interwoven branches and moss, always on the move before dawn. Thorne's agents were relentless, their sophisticated tracking technology and well-trained personnel closing in. John felt the constant pressure of their presence, like an invisible hand tightening around their throats. He knew they were dealing with more than just tracking dogs. He suspected thermal imaging, drones, and perhaps even satellite surveillance. During one particularly harrowing escape, as they navigated a narrow, fog-shrouded gorge, a team of agents materialized from the mist, their weapons raised. Before John could react, a tranquilizer dart whizzed past his ear, missing him by inches. But before another could be fired, Willow moved. With a speed that belied its bulk, it lunged forward, not in aggression, but in protection. Its enormous hand swept out, deflecting the incoming dart away from John, sending it spinning harmlessly into the moss. The agents, momentarily stunned by the creature's sudden powerful appearance, hesitated. That fleeting second was all John needed. He grabbed Willow's arm, pulling it deeper into the swirling mist, vanishing like specters. Willow's protective instincts became more pronounced, more active. It wasn't just a passive follower, it was an equal partner in their desperate flight, often leading the way, its keen senses detecting danger long before John did. Once, as they rested near a roaring waterfall, John spotted a red laser dot dance across Willow's chest, a sniper. Without a moment's hesitation, Willow shoved John behind a massive boulder, its own body momentarily exposed. A high-velocity dart thudded into the stone where John's head had been moments before. Willow then let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that vibrated through John's bones, filled with raw power and a surprising depth of emotion. The sniper, perhaps shaken by the creature's intelligence or the sheer force of its presence, didn't fire again. The bond between them deepened with every shared peril, every narrow escape. John realized Willow wasn't just protecting him. It saw him as part of its own, a vulnerable member of its pack. He was no longer just its caretaker. He was its companion, its friend. This realization fueled his own resolve. He would lead it to safety, no matter the cost. His body ached, his mind was weary, but his spirit remained unyielding. The wilderness had become their only home, and together they would face whatever Thorne and his men threw at them. The pursuit continued. A deadly game of cat and mouse played out in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific Northwest, pushing both man and creature to their absolute limits. The relentless chase finally led them to a remote, ancient waterfall, hidden deep within a canyon, carved by millennia of rushing water. It was a place John had only ever seen on weathered maps, a forgotten corner of the wilderness known to very few. The air thrummed with the ceaseless roar of the falling water, creating a perpetual mist that clung to the moss-covered rocks and giant ferns, giving the entire area an ethereal, primeval feel. Massive, moss-draped old trees, ancient sentinels, towered overhead, their canopies so dense that only slivers of sunlight pierced through, dappling the canyon floor. Here, at the very edge of what seemed like the known world, John and Willow found themselves cornered. The terrain was too treacherous to navigate further without being completely exposed, and the walls of the canyon rose steeply on either side, offering no clear path for escape. John could hear the distinct crunch of boots on fallen leaves and the distant crackle of radio static growing louder, echoing faintly over the waterfall's thunder. Thorne and his team were closing in, their methodical approach chillingly effective. John pressed himself against the damp rock face, pulling Willow close, though the creature's immense size made concealment difficult. He could feel Willow's deep, rhythmic breathing beside him, a primal reassurance in the face of impending doom. He gripped the worn handle of his hunting knife, a futile weapon against what was coming, but a symbol of his defiance nonetheless. He had led Willow as far as he could, but now, it seemed, their journey was reaching its bitter end. There was no more wilderness to disappear into, no more shadows to hide within. This was it. Agent Thorne's voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the roar of the waterfall, stark and uncompromising. John, Willow, this is Agent Thorne. You are surrounded. Resist, and we cannot guarantee the creature's safety. Surrender now, and we can resolve this peacefully. John scoffed inwardly. Peaceful resolution was not in Thorne's vocabulary. He knew what safety for Willow meant to Thorne: capture, experimentation, and likely an eventual and quiet elimination. A chill ran down John's spine, but beneath it, a familiar fire of defiance ignited. He would not let them take Willow. Not here. Not ever. He saw the first glint of tactical gear through the mist. Then another, and another. Dark figures emerged from the tree line, fanning out with practiced efficiency, their rifles raised and aimed. The red dots of laser sights danced ominously across the rock face, one briefly settling on Willow's chest, then John's head. John braced himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt Willow tense beside him, a low growl rumbling deep in its chest, a sound of ancient warning and fierce protectiveness. Just as Thorne was about to give the final, chilling order to open fire, a sound unlike any John had ever heard echoed through the canyon. A deep, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath his feet. It was a communication, powerful and undeniably intelligent, coming from the dense forest above them, beyond the FBI's perimeter. Suddenly, the ancient trees themselves seemed to stir. From the surrounding foliage, not one, but 3 massive figures emerged, stepping out of the mist and shadow, with an effortless grace that belied their immense size. They were Bigfoots, unmistakably so, but larger, grander, and far more imposing than Willow. Their fur was a darker, richer shade, their shoulders broader, their eyes holding an ancient wisdom that instantly commanded attention. They moved with a silent, deliberate power, their gaze fixed first on Willow, then on John, and finally on the armed agents. One, a colossal male with silver-streaked fur, stood at the forefront, his presence radiating an undeniable authority. Another, a slightly smaller but equally formidable female, had a young juvenile clinging to her back, its curious eyes peeking over her shoulder. Willow, who had been tensed for battle, let out a soft, almost keening sound, a mixture of recognition and relief, and moved a step forward, as if to greet them. The trio responded with softer, guttural rumblings, a clear language of their own. They formed a protective semicircle around John and Willow, their sheer bulk and silent dignity a formidable barrier. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, an ancient wilderness confronting modern weaponry. Thorne's agents hesitated. Their rigid formations wavered. The laser sights, which moments ago had been so confident, now danced erratically, reflecting the shock and disbelief etched on their faces. The unexpected appearance of not one, but four of these legendary creatures, particularly the adults, was clearly an overwhelming sight. Their training had prepared them for many hostile scenarios, but not for this. They looked to Thorne, their eyes wide with uncertainty, their fingers hovering over their triggers, clearly unsure of the protocol for engaging a family of mythical beings who were now standing protectively over a human. The primitive power of the wild, embodied in these magnificent creatures, had just brought the full force of modern military precision to a screeching, uncertain halt. The standoff was complete, the silence broken only by the thunder of the waterfall and the heavy breathing of men and beasts. The air crackled with a tension thicker than the forest mist as John stepped forward, his voice cutting through the hushed awe that had fallen over the scene. The newly arrived Bigfoots, giants among giants, stood sentinel behind Willow, their sheer presence a silent, undeniable power. John raised his hands, a gesture of peace, addressing Agent Thorne directly, his words echoing with conviction. He spoke of Willow's gentle nature, of the profound intelligence he had witnessed, of the peaceful cohabitation they had shared. He described the creature not as an anomaly to be eradicated, but as a sentient being deserving of respect, a vital, irreplaceable part of the delicate ecosystem they were poised to destroy. His gaze swept from Thorne's hardened face to the watchful eyes of the Bigfoots, then back again, trying to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding with nothing but truth. He told them how Willow had healed from grievous wounds, not by primitive instinct, but with a resilience and an almost human-like determination. He recounted acts of genuine compassion, the subtle nuances of Willow's emotional responses, the undeniable connection that had blossomed between species. He emphasized the catastrophic global ramifications if this majestic, peaceful family were to be met with violence. The world was watching, he implied, even if they weren't physically present. The echoes of such an act would reverberate far beyond this isolated valley. The Bigfoots remained motionless, their large eyes fixed on the exchange, their silent vigil a potent, unspoken threat. Their stillness was more intimidating than any roar, their collective gaze a heavy weight that pressed down on the armed agents. Thorne, for all his ruthless determination, was a pragmatist. He scanned the scene, his military-trained eyes assessing the overwhelming odds. The unexpected appearance of not one, but an entire family of these creatures, larger and more imposing than any legend had dared to suggest, had irrevocably shifted the dynamic. He saw the hesitation in his agents' eyes, the tremor in their hands. They were facing an unknown, a force of nature that defied all their protocols and training. A massacre here, in this pristine wilderness, against creatures that clearly possessed intelligence and social structure, would ignite a firestorm of public outrage that even his powerful agency could not contain. The potential for global backlash, the scientific and ethical debate that would erupt, the utter impossibility of containing such a devastating secret, it all flashed through his mind in a single, agonizing moment of clarity. His mission of eradication had collided with an undeniable reality, a force far greater than his orders. With a barely perceptible sigh, Thorne lowered his weapon, the metallic click reverberating through the tense silence. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, was now carefully measured, tinged with a grudging defeat. "Hold position," he ordered, his gaze still locked on the protective Bigfoots. "Stand down. Tactical retreat." The words seemed to hang in the air for a breath. Almost unbelievable. His agents, their relief palpable, slowly began to lower their rifles, their shoulders dropping as the immense pressure eased. Thorne gave one last, long look at John, a flicker of something akin to respect, or perhaps just bewildered resignation, in his eyes, before turning and signaling his unit to withdraw, their presence melting back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. John watched them go, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion washing over him. The immediate threat had receded, but the profound silence that replaced the tension was almost deafening. Willow turned, its large head nudging his shoulder gently, a soft, rumbling sound emanating from its chest. It was a gesture of gratitude, of farewell. John reached up, his hand resting on the creature's powerful arm, a silent bond forged in shared peril and mutual respect. Then, slowly, Willow turned towards its family. There was a moment of unspoken communication, a series of gentle nudges and soft calls, before the injured Bigfoot, now fully recovered thanks to John's care, embraced its kin. It was a reunion tinged with a solemn dignity, a testament to bonds that transcended the human understanding of family. John watched, a lump forming in his throat, as Willow took its place among them, no longer an isolated, vulnerable juvenile, but a cherished member of its own kind. As if on cue, the entire family began to move, their massive forms disappearing into the dense undergrowth, merging seamlessly with the ancient trees. They did not look back. They simply dissolved into the mist-shrouded wilderness, leaving John standing alone by the thundering waterfall, the only visible trace of their presence, the faint, earthy scent of their passing, and the crushing weight of their departure. The forest, once a sanctuary and then a battlefield, now felt achingly empty. John was a man without a cabin, without a ranger's post, without the quiet, predictable life he had once known. But he was also a man transformed, his soul irrevocably touched by the impossible. He had looked into the eyes of the unknown and found not a beast, but a kindred spirit. His purpose, once lost in personal tragedy and professional disillusionment, was now crystal clear. He would become their voice, their reluctant advocate. He would share their story, not with scientific journals or sensationalist tabloids, but through quiet, persistent testimony, ensuring that the world understood that some mysteries were best left undisturbed, that some lives deserved to live free from human interference. The Bigfoot family was gone, but the echo of their presence, the profound truth of their existence, would resonate within John forever. The search for meaning now led him not away from the unseen, but towards it, armed with a new understanding and an unwavering commitment to protect the hidden wonders of the wild. What do you believe truly exists beyond our sight, lurking in the shadows of our perception? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, for it is in these untamed places that the greatest truths often lie hidden. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales that challenge the boundaries of belief. And be sure to check out our next video for another incredible story that will make you question everything you thought you knew.